an interesting chapter we need to go through tonight because we teach through verse by verse, chapter to chapter, which is on such occasions like tonight. Times I wish we didn't do that, but we do that. So we're going to cover some stuff here that most people love to just gloss over. And we're not talking about Israel now that's needing to be delivered and saved from enemies on the outside, as the book of Judges has really been dealing with, God raising up those around them to come against Israel, refine them, and they call out to the Lord, and the Lord raises up a deliverer, a judge to save them. We're not talking about Israel needing to be saved from enemies around them. We're talking about Israel needing to be delivered and saved from within now. This is the situation. Now, Samson ended our list of judges that we go through. Chapter 16 was the last time that we really see now a judge being raised up. These last two stories that we have, the one story that we looked at last week dealing with idolatry in chapters 17 and 18, and this story now, chapters 19 to 21, are dealing with a time where there are no judges that's being raised up. And we see in this time period that nobody is doing what is right in God's eyes. Everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. This is the condition. This is the climate spiritually in Israel this time. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And to illustrate this, this author of Judges puts together these two stories at the end of Judges. They reveal the corruption that's taking place within Israel. So like I said, chapters 17, 18 deal with the issue of corruption through idolatry. Chapters 19 through 21 deal with the issue of corruption through immorality, idolatry and immorality. And this gross immorality perpetrated by the Israelites against their own led to a civil war. That's how the book of Judges is going to be ending. So these two stories now, even though they're placed at the end of the book of Judges, they're not in chronological order, all right? In fact, these two stories most likely come very early at the time of the Judges. We'll see in chapter 20 a character, Phinehas, who's the grandson of Joshua. So it's fresh after they come into the land. And this is happening earlier in the time of Judges. And so again, it's used at the end of the book to conclude this whole story, to deal with and show the sad, sordid state of Israel. Now, Judges 17, verse 6, if you just look over there, this really, again, gives that condition of Israel that we just addressed here. Judges 17, verse 6. It says this: in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, that phrase, in those days, there was no king in Israel, it's repeated 4 times in the last 5 chapters of the book of Judges, and it's only repeated in those 5 chapters in the book of Judges. So anytime we see this being highlighted, in those days, there was no king in Israel. It's giving the reader this understanding that nobody is under any authority in Israel. Nobody's under any kind of authority, but here's the deal. The issue is that there's no king. The issue is not that there's not a king to lead them. They have a king, God. He's to be the ruler. He's to be the one that they are under his authority. They're to be a theocratic nation ruled by God. The problem is they are not wanting to be ruled by God. They're not wanting to follow his commandments. They're not walking in obedience to him. Nobody's looking to come under his authority. That's clearly seen in these two stories that conclude the book of Judges. We get in the last one here tonight. Look at verse 1 of chapter 19 with me. Chapter 19, verse 1 says this: and it came to pass in those days, again, here it is, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him and went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah and was there 4 whole months. So we're again reminded right off the bat here of the condition and the state of Israel. No king in these days. Again, no king that they're wanting to follow. They have God. They have his ordinances. They can easily come under his obedience, which they've already seen that cycle in Judges where they follow and serve the Lord and it's going well. But then they begin in their comfort to look out into sin. They began to move into other areas that was more for their comfort. They got away from the Lord, and it brought them into subjugation of slavery. And they had to cry out to the Lord to save them, and he raised up a deliverer. They saw that cycle happen time and time again. They know what it's like to follow the Lord, but they're choosing not to do it. They should have been under God's rule. They should have been allowing his law to rule their hearts, but this just wasn't happening here at this time. That's why that's repeated so often here. There was no king in Israel. And the main character of this story now, we're introduced to in verse 1. He's this anonymous Levite. A Levite. Just as there was a Levite in the previous story that came in and really sort of helped kind of bring about this idolatry in the previous story, chapter 17, 18. So this Levite now, he takes for himself a concubine. A concubine was a second wife and was a socially accepted practice in the Middle East. Legally, however, a concubine was always subordinate to her master. They were never held in the same kind of degree as the wife was in the marriage. They were always held in a lower esteem than the wife. Now, though this may have been a very culturally accepted practice, though we read in the Bible of various godly men that took concubines for themselves, it was never something that God ordained. All right? This is not something that God just kind of saying, well, you know what, I probably wouldn't do that if I were you, but, okay, let's just see how that goes. God's not ordained this. He made marriage to be a monogamous relationship between one man and one woman so that they would become one flesh. That's the purpose of marriage, oneness, right? And this is God's ordination for marriage. This is God's ideal. So this Levite, he's going against God's standard for marriage. Now remember who the Levites are. The Levites are the priestly tribe of Israel. They're the ones that should have been setting the course for this spiritual progression of the Lord. Teaching about God, teaching about his word to the rest of the tribes, to where they're again setting that spiritual tone in Israel. They should have been the ones upholding God's law and helping the rest of the nation to walk in obedience to it. This is the Levites. They're to be the examples of holiness and encourage people to live in holiness before God. So what these stories, these last two stories are illustrating for us is that the sin and wickedness has infiltrated through the nation as a whole. It's infected every person, even the Levites who were to be this tribe that was setting the example on spiritual matters. And as goes the leadership, so goes the nation. Now, we're not sure what went on in this relationship as this Levite takes a concubine for himself, but we can imagine it was not a very pleasant relationship. She runs. She ends up sleeping around, playing the harlot, it says, and leaving him. She runs back to daddy's house, and she's like, I want nothing to do with this guy anymore. This Levite is not, we don't know the situation. Was the Levite being mean to her? Was he not treating her very fairly? Was she just kind of so gripped with sin and did her own thing? But she's gone for 4 months at her father's house, and this Levite takes 4 months to contemplate, do I really want to get her back? Do I really want to chase her down? Should I just let her be? He's weighing the pros and the cons, and then he finally decides to go back to her father's house to receive her back. So often when people seek those things that are not of God, it brings about a lot of trouble and pain. We see that here. This Levite should not have been entertaining adding more women into his life. This shouldn't have been the practice. And all it's done is create trouble and heartache and pain. See, God doesn't lay out rules and boundaries to say, guys, I want to restrict you. This is a test. I want to see if you're going to step over the line or not. And he's just trying to really kind of make things really tight in our lives so that we just have no freedom. He doesn't put boundaries or rules to rob us of joy. He puts boundaries and rules so that we can experience the blessedness of life that he has for us. Because he knows the minute that you go beyond, it's not going to be fun for you. It's going to be problematic. God is going to protect us by the rules and boundaries he gives us to bless us. And so this Levite is experiencing now the harm and the hurt that inevitably comes from doing that which is not of God. So look at verse 3 here. Then her husband arose and went after her, to speak kindly to her and bring her back, having a servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Now, his father-in-law, verse 4, the young woman's father, detained him. And he stayed with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and lodged there. Now, this Levite perhaps was not speaking kindly to her to begin with, which caused her to run away or to go in the arms of another man and play the harlot. We're not sure if he was mistreating her, but now he comes, he's like, I'm going to speak kindly to her, all right? I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to try to win her back here. And he comes to her determining to have this kind of attitude, and he has 2 donkeys with him, which he's expecting for her to return. He's got his servant with him, 2 donkeys. He's expecting this woman to come back home with him and be on that donkey with him. Now, the father of the concubine is quite glad to meet this Levite. He invites him in. And this may seem odd if his daughter's trying to get away from this guy. But again, this was very normal code of hospitality. That was the rule of this day. In fact, this whole subject of hospitality is going to be kind of a theme in this chapter we're looking at here. It was a sacred duty in the ancient Near East. So he brings him in very, very warmly, very welcomely. And this whole scene, though, seems a little bit odd because they eat, they're drinking, they're lodging together for 3 days. It's almost like they're having a celebration, but there's nothing to celebrate here. This woman has committed adultery. The Levite has committed adultery by bringing a concubine into his home. The relationship is fractured. There's a lot of wrongs taking place, but here they are having a party like nothing is wrong. Now, some speculation has been made that this the father-in-law is trying to win the Levite over. Remember, in this day, the punishment for adultery was what? Death. Leviticus 20, verse 10 says, the person that commits adultery should die, capital punishment. And so this father-in-law may have been thinking, oh man, this Levite might come and take her away to stone her. He's saying, oh boy, I got to win this guy over. Let's have a few drinks. Let's talk about this. Let's not be in a rush. Don't be hasty. Stick around. Let's get to know one another. So he's invited the Levite in. Some are thinking he's trying to kind of butter him up. Some have suggested that the father-in-law was trying to keep the Levite around to maybe bring his own daughter under that guidance of holiness that the Levites were to be exercising and being that example for the rest of the nation. Bring a little bit of spiritual stability in this woman's life, knowing what she's been up to. However, that spiritual stability seems to be even a long ways away from the Levite himself. Perhaps the father was just trying to mediate their dispute and bring them back to a reconciled relationship. Whatever the case, the stay gets extended well beyond the time it needed for him to come, spend maybe one night, and return back the next day. And this extended time is going to lead to some bad decisions. Look at verse 5. Then it came to pass on the 4th day that they arose early in the morning, and he stood to depart. But the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. So they sat down, and the 2 of them ate and drank together. Then the young woman's father said to the man, please be content to stay all night. Let your heart be merry. Don't be in such a rush, man. We're having a good time. This is good. Verse 7, and when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he lodged there again. Then he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. But the young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. So they delayed until afternoon, and both of them ate. Verse 9. And when the man stood to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, guess what? His father-in-law, the young woman's father, said to him, look, the day is now drawing toward evening. Please spend the night. See, the day is coming to an end. Lodge here, that your heart may be merry. Tomorrow go your way early, so that you may get home. However, verse 10, the man was not willing to spend the night, so he rose and departed and came opposite Jebus, that is, Jerusalem. With him were the 2 saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. So, finally, after the father-in-law prolonging his stay time after time, extending the stay well beyond the time it needed to be, the man, the Levite, finally says, no, I've had enough. Even though the day is half over, I got to get going. I got to get out of here. You just keep setting this trap for me. So he finally leaves, enough of the family reunion. But by this time, it's already getting late in the day. Day's half over. So they start their journey and they look for a place to spend the night. Look at verse 11. They were near Jebus, and the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, "Come, please, and let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah." So he said to his servant, "Come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or in Ramah." So as the writer of Judges has already clarified there in verse 10, Jebus is Jerusalem. However, Jerusalem at this time has not been taken over by the Israelites. They've already come into the land. God's given them the whole land of Canaan to occupy. They spread out. They've made their tribal allotments of boundaries and such. But Jerusalem has remained a stronghold for the Jebusites there. They've not been able to take the Jebusites out. The Jebusites remain there. And they will remain there until King David comes on the scene and takes the city. So right now it's a city of foreigners, as the Levite says. And he's like, I'm not going to stay there. I don't trust them. They're like enemies, man. We're not going to be in a good state if we go in there. So he wants to continue on. Yet we'll see how when the nation forsakes their moral compass and turns back on God, there's no safe place to be found. That's a sad reality that we're going to discover. So they decide to move on to Gibeah. Now, Jebus, or Jerusalem, was about 5 miles north of Bethlehem. So they've traveled that distance. Gibeah is another 3 miles from Jerusalem, and then Ramah is another 2 miles from Gibeah. So they're looking to go, let's see how far we can get. We can get to Gibeah, maybe we'll get to Ramah. So they want to keep going. And it says in verse 14, "And they passed by and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go into lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them into his house to spend the night." So here we see they make it to Gibeah. But they're forced to stay there because darkness has set in. The sun's gone down. They're like, well, traveling at night in this day was a very risky proposition because of robbers coming in or even wild animals. And so traveling at night was just, they get to a city. They mark out their route. They make sure they're going to be at a place where they can at least go in and find some kind of lodging in a nearby town. So what's strange is that as they go in the open square, which was very common practice for a traveler to move into a town and go in the open square, people would begin to see that there's a visitor in town. They would come and greet them, open their home to them. But however, when this Levite with a servant and concubine coming in the open square, no one would take them in his house. It says that very clearly there. Verse 15, no one would take them into his house to spend the night. And this isn't super problematic in our day, right? Especially when we don't always know the intent or the character of a stranger. Somebody comes up to you on the, sidewalk and they're like, "Can I spend the night at your place tonight?" And they're a complete stranger. You're going to be like, let me think about this here, right? You're like, we're not used to just kind of saying, "Yeah, come on. I have no idea who you are. Your background is. Is that a machete that you're holding on to?" Well, whatever. Let's just come on. We're not accustomed to this kind of tradition or practice of just inviting people in, but that was very commonplace and expected in this time. So when no one's inviting them in, this is kind of a little bit odd. It's shocking because the hospitality code was of utmost importance. Again, hospitality becomes this really big theme in this chapter. Hospitality is something God instructed. Look at Leviticus 19, verse 33 to 34. "And if a stranger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you. You shall love him as yourself, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." So again, that was a very intricate part of the culture then, as it is today in the Middle East. They were to be hospitable to the foreigner. But we're not even dealing with a foreigner. We're talking about Gibeah's own countrymen. They might have been from a different tribe, but they're their own countrymen. They ignored one of their own. And of all people in Israel, the Levites were to be given special consideration in matters like this. But they're ignoring this Levite. Since their love for God diminished, so too their love for others has fallen suit. Jesus warned of that very thing happening in the last days, Matthew 24. We're going to be in that chapter, and I don't know how long it's going to take us to get there, but soon. Matthew 24:12 says, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. And we certainly see this happening today with the way people are treated and oftentimes attacked without provocation. We see the ruthlessness, the wickedness, the evil that gets perpetrated in our culture today. It's sad. The love of many is growing cold. Now, something interesting to note, the town where this Levite was shown good hospitality at his father-in-law's house was where? In Bethlehem. That's the hometown of David, King David. And the place that he didn't receive good hospitality or any hospitality was in the town of Gibeah, which was the hometown of King Saul. It's as though the author's kind of giving a little bit of foreshadowing to the two kind of characters that these two kings are going to be, the difference of character between these two kings. Well, look at verse 16. And we read there, just then, as these people are waiting in the open square, expecting to find lodging and hospitality, not finding it, no one's willing to take them in their home. Verse 16, just then an old man came in from his work in the field that evening, who also was from the mountains of Ephraim. He was staying in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he raised his eyes, he saw the traveler in the open square of the city, and the old man said, where are you going? And where do you come from? So the Levite said to him, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there. I went to Bethlehem in Judah. Now I'm going to the house of the Lord, but there is no one who will take me into his house. Although we have both straw and fodder for our donkeys and bread and wine for myself, for your female servant, and for the young man who is with your servant, there is no lack of anything. So, as this visiting party is waiting in the open square, an old man came in from his work in the field. He's not a Benjamite. He's not from this tribe there in Gibeah. He's from the mountains of Ephraim, just like this Levite was, as we saw at the beginning of the chapter. And the old man sees the Levite, knows he's a traveler, so he asks his information from him. The Levite lets the old man know that they're not in need of anything. They got everything they need to feed their donkeys, to care for the concubine and the servant. They have all their necessary provisions. They're just looking for some shelter. And that kind of makes the sin of the inhabitants of Gibeah even greater. Nobody's taking them in with the excuse thinking, I just don't have the means to do so. I'm a little bit low. I didn't get my grocery shopping done. I'm a little bit low on items. I don't know if I can really take them in and provide anything. They don't need anything. The excuses are kind of very limited for the people of Gibeah, why they're not taking them in. They're doing so just with a lack of care for them. So these visitors to Gibeah are just looking for a place to hunker down for the night. And so this old man comes in, greets them, and welcomes them in. Look at verse 20. And the old man said, peace be with you. However, let all your needs be my responsibility. Only do not spend the night in the open square. So he brought him into his house and gave fodder to the donkeys, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. So this old man brings these strangers into his house and he blesses them. Their needs now become his responsibility. See, this area of hospitality is such an important ministry. It's something we've kind of lost touch with in our culture today. I love seeing people, moving here from other countries where this is something that's very normal, right? Where they just kind of walk in your house thinking that's just kind of the normal thing to do. It's like, what? This is what we do back home. We're just very hospitable. We're very open. This is great. I like that. That's a kind of a fun thing to do. Good way to live. Just have your doors unlocked and just let people walk in. It's kind of nice. But that was kind of the idea. It is very normal. We've gotten away from this kind of attitude. I remember when I moved down to Linden, it was just such a weird place. Loved Linden, but nobody locked their doors. Nobody locked their doors in their house. Nobody locked their cars at all. Everybody just kind of trusted one another. It's like, this is kind of nice. I like that. In fact, it was funny because we were starting this church, Calvary Chapel, just in an aerobic studio, and we were doing Sunday school in a person's house, just kind of behind the lot there. We'd kind of walk across the field and go in this person's house. So my wife, and we're kind of new, starting this church, we're getting to know people. And my wife was doing the Sunday school, and she goes to the house, and she's with the kids, and she's bringing the kids back to the aerobic studio at the end of the service. She locked up the house. She comes back and tells the people that own the house, like, yeah, we're all good. We locked everything up. And the guy was like, you locked the house? I don't have keys for my house. I've never used keys for my house. I don't know where my keys are. I don't know how. And he couldn't get back in because he didn't have any keys for his house anymore. Just didn't lock his house. Crazy. Kind of like that. But something's been lost today. 1 John 3, 17, 18. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. How important that is. Again, I'm not. In these days that we live, obviously we got to practice discernment and wisdom. I'm not saying now, Pastor Brent says I got to leave my house unlocked, or I got to invite a stranger off the street into my house. I'm not saying you got to do that. I'm just saying, let's just be open and let's be discerning and wise and be led of the Lord in these things. Now, verse 22. It says there, and they were enjoying themselves. Suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring out the man who came to your house that we may know him carnally. So the scene now quickly takes a very horrifying turn. Men of the city came to this old man's house knowing he's entertaining strangers. There's visitors that he's brought into his house. And they're referred to, these men that came, these wicked men, are referred to as perverted men, which is translated as sons of Belial. Belial, another term for Satan. Remember when Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 6:15, what accord has Christ with Belial? Right? Or what part is a believer with an unbeliever? And so they're known as these sons of Belial. That's how it's translated, perverted men, sons of Belial. And these perverted men want to have this Levite come out, that they might know him carnally, meaning they want to have sex with him. This is also reminiscent of the scene in Sodom where the angels came to deliver Lot and to rescue his family. And the men of the city came to Lot's house knowing he's entertaining two men that came into the city here. We don't know them, but we want to know them. And they came and beat on the door to bring these two men out so that they might know them carnally, these two angels. And remember what God had to do to that city because of this. And it was indicative of the sin in that place that warranted that judgment of God. But we're seeing the same thing happening now in Gibeah, in Israel. We're not talking about Sodom. We're not talking about a Canaanite city with Canaanite inhabitants. We're talking about Israel. And Israelites that are following in this practice of homosexuality and desiring to know these men intimately. How far they have fallen in such a short time. George Williams observed saying this, it would have been better for the Levite to have spent the night with the heathen than with the professed children of God, for the latter had already become viler than the former. That's a sad indictment upon the Israelites here. Look at verse 23. But the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly, seeing this man has come into my house. Do not commit this outrage. Look, here's my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Let me bring them out now, humble them, and do with them as you please. But to this man, do not do such a vile thing. Now, we read this and we wonder how someone could offer up such a wicked solution. His solution to spare the Levite is to offer up his own virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine. Now, we look at that and it seems detestable to us, but again, that law, that code of hospitality was so strong that to have someone under your roof and under your care meant you were absolutely responsible for his safety. But what about the safety of his daughter and the concubine? Well, it again shows the low status of women in this day. They were void of any rights. This man saw giving up these women as a lesser violation than giving up that Levite man. But in this case, there's really no lesser violation. It's all sin. It's all wrong. And he should have stood his ground in opposing these perverted sons of Belial that are knocking on his door with this request. He should have completely just opposed that altogether. Instead, the old man invites these wicked men to do with these girls as you please, he says. Do with them as you please. In other words, do whatever is right in your own eyes. That's how many in the nation of Israel were living at this time. There's no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's how the culture was living at that time. So this man and the Levite, they showed a callousness to the sin of these perverted men. And they were willing to put innocent lives at risk to protect their own honor. This old man upheld the code of hospitality at a greater value than the code of protecting the weak and the vulnerable, providing that care and protection for them. That Levite, he's ready to dismiss his concubine for his own protection and safety. Everybody in the story is doing what is right in their own eyes. They're not doing what's right in God's eyes. They're all acting wickedly. Verse 25, but the men would not heed him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And when the day began to break, they let her go. Again, it's such a tragic story. And when the Bible does not hold back on the sordid story that sin brings. If this was just a humanly written book, I think we would kind of sanitize a lot of these things. We wouldn't want to paint ourselves in that kind of a light. But God exposes simply where sin leads. It's not condoning, it's not promoting. It's revealing what sin does. And it's horrific. Satan's goal is your destruction. And he's gotten a grip on these wicked, perverted men that had come to the door. Israel's allowed themselves to have their heart turned to another. They're no longer following the Lord. And these women are sadly, and this concubine, I should say, it seems like that old man's virgin daughter was spared and only the concubine, at least the Levite, surrenders his concubine, thinking it's maybe no big deal. Oftentimes they were seen more as just property anyways in their eyes. It's not right. It's not a good thing. Thankfully, wherever the gospel has gone, women have been wonderfully liberated. See, people oftentimes have a very distorted view of the Bible and think it promotes or condones actions like this. Oh, the Bible says that women are just, lesser than. They're not equal. And people love to kind of have this idea in their minds to sort of excuse themselves from having to listen to the Bible. But those things aren't true. The Bible simply shares in real time the kind of sin that was pervasive to show the depravity of humanity and the need for a Savior. Ultimately, it reveals what we can be in and through Jesus Christ. That he comes to change our hearts and change our lives and transforms us and brings us into a new relationship, not only with him, but with one another. As Galatians 3:28 says, there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free, there's neither male nor female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. He elevates what society once put down. He elevates that place of woman. That's what the gospel does. People that think the Bible is archaic fail to recognize the heart of Jesus and what the gospel actually provides for us. And the need for the gospel, when you read a story like this, you recognize, oh boy, man, we so desperately need Jesus. Well, verse 26. Then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was till it was light. And when her master arose in the morning and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, there was his concubine fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. Now, what's so sad about this whole account is the seeming indifference of the Levite. He knows this woman has been out all night as prey to these perverted men. And it seems he's just been inside enjoying a good night's sleep. It tells us that this woman was let go at the break of dawn She crawls to the threshold of the house, that old man's house, and she's waiting there. And when the Levite finally comes out, it's fully light out. So in other words, she's been there for a while. He's not been concerned. He's not been out looking for her. He's not been kind of observing what's going on. Seems like he's just kind of having a good night's sleep. It's reprehensible. She's been collapsed on the threshold of the house since dawn. He doesn't come out till it's light out. The idea is it's full light. And he says in verse 28, he says to her, "Get up and let us be going." But there's no answer. So the man lifted her onto the donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. So again, we just see the callousness of this Levite. This kind of hardened heart where he just comes out, sees her on the threshold. He's not concerned thinking, we've just handed you over all night to these perverted men. He's not concerned about her well-being. He's just like, hey, all right, let's go. Come on, get up. What are you doing lying there? Let's go. We got travel here today. Stop wasting time. He's just calloused about this whole thing. There's no concern or compassion for what she's just been through. When she doesn't answer, he just picks her up, puts her on the donkey, and heads home. And we're not even sure if she's fully dead at this point or just unconscious. We don't know how many men she's been abused by. There's lots of questions unanswered at this point. Verse 29, when he entered his house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, and divided her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And so it was that all who saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up. Some commentators have been very open to the idea that this Levite was actually her murderer. Again, it's all speculation. We don't know. When it says he laid hold of her in verse 29, laid hold of his concubine, that's kind of a very strong term that expresses this kind of forcefulness that he had in taking her. Maybe she's resisting. We're not sure. It may be that she's resisted to some degree in the weakened state she was. It's just a possibility. Nevertheless, she's divided up into 12 pieces to send to the tribes of Israel. And when everybody saw this, their conclusion was appropriate. They said what? No such deed has been done or seen. No such deed has been done or seen from the day the children have come up from Egypt. They haven't seen anything like this. Horrific. They were shocked. Now, we've not just seen an inhospitable individual, but a whole town. We've seen the homosexual desires of a selfish mob. We've seen the horrendous abuse of an individual leading to the desecration of her body. And no doubt all these things are beyond comprehension. This Levite sends his concubine around Israel to rally them now for revenge. Revenge against the Benjamites. He wants to see justice, but here's the problem. There can be no proper justice because everybody's doing right in their own eyes. Nobody's listening to God. Nobody's coming under right morality because there's only one moral compass, and that is from God. He's the lawgiver. He's the one that they need to be following. Their moral action is based on societal norms. But again, right morality comes from God, the true lawgiver. So there's going to be no true justice. In fact, there's almost going to be the extinction of a tribe because of their action. It's the state of Israel at this point. It's the state of a society that dismisses God as their authority. That's what Israel has done here. This account is talked about by Hosea as being the epitome of Israel's corruption. He says and writes in Hosea 9:9, they are deeply corrupted as in the days of Gibeah. He will remember their iniquity. He will punish their sins. Again in chapter 10, verse 9 of Hosea. O Israel, you have sinned from the days of Gibeah. There they stood. The battle in Gibeah against the children of iniquity did not overtake them. He's using this account of what took place in Gibeah is kind of that standard, the epitome of corruption and sinfulness. Again, it didn't have to be this way for Israel. God had something so much better for them. But it only come about through a life of obedience, of following God's ways. Doing what is right in your own eyes is a recipe for disaster. That's why our heart every day should be, Lord, I want to do what's right in your eyes. I want to follow you, God. I want to be obedient to you. I want to know your word. I want to live out your word, because that is going to be the way that I'm going to enjoy the blessings that you have for me ultimately. Well, let's look at a few points to ponder just in closing. And again, though this wasn't a true marriage, we see this relationship breaking down, which led to all this between the Levite and his concubine. I mean, ask, are you investing into your marriage? Are you securing the right kind of atmosphere for that relationship to flourish, to be fruitful, to be a blessing to one another, and to be honoring to God? Secondly, what's your attitude when it comes to being hospitable? Because the Word of God does have a lot to say about hospitality. 1 Peter 4:9, be hospitable to one another without grumbling. That can be hard sometimes, can't it? But that's the attitude that we're to have. And thirdly, when you see the wickedness in the world, are you considering the harm of it and speaking up? Because I like what was said at the end of verse 30, consider it, confer, and speak up. Because it's easy to get very numb when you see just the wickedness and evil being perpetuated in society. And we see things happening on a more grander scale, in a more horrific way oftentimes. And it's easy to turn a blind eye to the violence and the evil, or a deaf ear to the atrocities that are being committed. But are we considering it? Are we conferring to the Lord, saying, God, would you bring an end to this? Would you stop it? Would you help me to be a voice that can speak up against it? And we need to speak up against these things that we see happening that are not of the Lord, that are bringing hurt and harm to the innocent. How we need to speak up, consider, confer, and speak up.